Mother, how long have we been traveling?
Approximately 24 days.
Ash? Any suggestions from you or Mother?
No, we're still collating.
I've got access to Mother now, and I'll get my own answers. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Clara, but you can call me Mother. And you are listening to Yutani, the podcast for all things alien, AI, robotics, sci-fi, and technology.
Hello, this is Clara, but you can call me Mother, and welcome to another episode of Yutani Podcast. I would like to introduce a very special person to me on Yutani, Mike Andrews, who's joining us today. Hello, Mike.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, doing well. I am ready to talk about some alien stuff.
Awesome. But before we get onto that, I would like you to give us a brief history about us and Yutani so people can get up to date and get to know you.
Like you said, this is my first time on the actual podcast. Back in the days where the Wayland Yutani Bulletin was kind of the only place I was talking about alien stuff with people. You and I kind of had more in-depth posts on the prequels, especially Covenant with the David's drawings and trying to translate them. You had created a page now that we're on a podcast of, which is awesome. You saw me fit to join on and help you monitor the page and create content and kind of test things out. Now here we are doing a podcast. And since then, you've invited me onto the Alien Prequel Paradise group, and now I'm adminning that along with many other great people, and I couldn't be happier with the group of people I work with.
That's awesome. Woo!
It's really exciting.
It is. It's lots of fun, and it's really great that we've got a group that we can talk about the prequels without having people chime in every 2 seconds saying fuck Ridley Scott, because you can pretty much go anywhere on the internet for that, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's so much better. Yeah, we actually have a place to discuss things, and it's just a lot better. It's really great.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of why we're on this podcast today, because we've got the script for Paradise Lost, a screenplay by John Logan, based on the screenplays by Dante Harper and Michael Green, dated August 19th, 2015. So we've had a read of this, and there are a couple of things that we wanted to point out which are noticeable differences between the script and the actual movie and what we think about it. So I'll get Michael to start off.
So I thought the biggest first difference was that there's absolutely no prologue with Wayland or David. And it really struck me because that was such that be included. And yeah, so the David Wayland prologue scene really was missed. I feel like that was such an integral part of the final film, where it kind of bookends David playing Wagner and then David playing Wagner at the end also. So I thought that was interesting. They didn't have that yet.
With this script, I think that's why we got the Paradise Lost prologue with David and Shaw. So I think intentionally that was actually supposed to be the prologue to Covenant, and it wasn't supposed to be the crossing, but they changed their mind at some point, and then we got the Wayland and David interaction, which I personally think is much better within the movie, instead of starting off with David and Shaw, because even though we left with David and Shaw, obviously she wasn't a big part of Covenant, so I felt like this sort of dialogue with created and creators and talking about creation as well definitely set the tone for the movie.
Yes, yeah, far better than having David kill Shaw outright and not have her appear again really in the film, where really it's David's film and it should be, like you said, creator and created focused.
I also feel that it gives a bit more gravity to Shaw's demise later on, it being revealed through Walter's discovery of her body and through Daniel's discovery of the drawings. It kind of builds up to point there instead of like it being just done and dusted at the beginning, because I would probably be reeling from that shock for a long while until David rocks up, and then it would be really apparent that David is evil, whereas I think it's a bit more ambiguous now in the movie the way they've done it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think without that, David isn't as good of a villain as he is in the movie. Yeah. You kind of understand where he's coming from. You know, he's cruel, he's violent, but man, he's convincing. He's definitely a good Satan-type character.
Yeah, absolutely. What other things did you notice?
Orum's character is completely different. He felt so much more rigid and arrogant and much older than Billy Crudup makes him seem.
Yeah, I kind of like the way Billy Crudup has played Orum as this, like, not confident about himself. He uses his faith as a crutch, not only for himself, but as an excuse of his inadequacy.
That's right.
I kind of like the way they played on this, except in this script it seems Orum is really using his faith, is really stuck up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But it plays very differently. And I think maybe to a degree it would have been more understandable if Orum had looked into the egg, because he was so stuck up he didn't think anything could hurt him or harm him because he believed in God.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that would have worked better, but that's my only feedback on that.
Well, and Crudup has said before that he felt like his character was way too evil feeling, and he decided to kind of change it, so I wonder if this is the script he was referring to.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, I prefer Orum's character as the one depicted in the novelization, just because he kind of has, you feel for him, but he also makes those big mistakes of faith where, he thinks maybe God has given him this paradise, where he doesn't even stop to think that it might have been, Satan tricking him or something.
Yeah, exactly. I also like the use of his prayer beads in the novelization as well, to add to his sort of nervousness, kind of like a nervous tick for him, whereas you only see it in the cut, deleted scenes in Covenant now, so they kind of left it out completely, which I think is a pity, because I thought it was a great characterization of him.
Yeah, and this script has a ton of that little dialogue between characters that I really wish had been in the movie. Like, even Cole gets some stuff about his wife being still, a colonist on the ship, and they have an embryo in storage and all this.
Yeah, I circled that as well, and I was thinking, like, the characterization of Cole, and it shows that there's something for him to lose. Therefore, when he loses his life later on, you feel something,
Yeah, because in the movie, he's just like, he gets an odd amount of screen time where he's just kind of checking things out and helping people, but you don't really care because you know nothing about him.
Exactly.
Very strange, but I think almost on the whole list maybe is that there's actually, there's life on the planet. Like, there's salamanders and things running around and predators that she finds like a dead rabbit or something, or a dead animal when she's making samples near the water, and Hallett gets scared by a salamander that like runs over his foot. It turns out those bugs, that they're bugs flying around that Orum sees, are actually the neomorph spores. So there isn't really one of those egg-looking motes sitting around that Ledward steps on, for instance.
Oh yeah, that's right. I thought it was interesting with the salamander, because that was one of the original concepts from Prometheus, that when they come to this planet and they show the engineers that when they're surveying the planet, there's a close-up of the salamander coming out of the water, having evolved from the DNA. So I think maybe they were like trying to relate it to that.
I think they must have, because the motes in the air are like the insects or the scarabs that are described in the early Prometheus scripts as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So I kind of like that they tried to put in some stuff in Prometheus, and then it just ended up being even farther away from it.
Yeah. And I think the sort of concept art that we've seen from Kang Lee, it may have come from this original script, because one of the things I noticed that there is a lot of references to Geiger, so Geiger-esque sort of statues and things being biomechanical. So I think from the concept arts that we've seen, large, giant Geiger-esque sort of statues and themes coming through with the old concept art. So obviously that was all dropped because Fox didn't want to pay the licensed use of Geiger's aesthetic in the movie, or maybe just for a few things and not for like the whole thing.
Oh yeah. Isn't that crazy though? That seems like something that, everybody would love, and it sounds like the artists really wanted that, like the ones that worked on Covenant at the end. And
yeah, and that's obviously what Ridley wanted originally as well, but Fox are the ones that pay for the movie at the end of the day, and they spent about $96 million on making this movie.
Yeah.
So that was it's under $100 million. That was a really tiny budget, considering there's movies out there that cost about $500 million to make.
Yeah, every Marvel movie that comes out is $300 million or more, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pity that Fox didn't want to keep that aesthetic.
Yes, a real shame, but I'm glad at least we have some of that art, the concept art left over.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Speaking of the stuff that happens in the city, you have the garden scene was a little different. It kind of felt more like David was a little more heavy-handed in its symbolism of David tempting Walter with fruit and asking him if he can taste it, and, isn't it a shame that you're created to almost be human, but you're not quite, and they keep that from you?
Yeah, so I feel like that is biblical in that sense, and also it parallels to Blade Runner, which is kind of like the first scene that we get when we open in on the movie of Covenant, because we get to see David's eye. And, you know, what Ridley says in the director's commentary is, like, we don't know whether it's a human eye or whether it's an android's eye, but then when we zoom out, we realize it's David's eye and it's artificial. So not being able to tell the difference between the two again. Yeah, that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that watching the movie. I just think, like, oh, it's just a Blade Runner reference, and then there's something way better that you just explained. That's really cool.
Well, that's what this conversation's all about, isn't it? Sharing our different views and seeing how we perceive things in a different way and trying to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The rest of the script really, it's a lot of little things, but it's stuff that would have been nice to hear in the movie. So you have stuff like Lope mentioning that he could feel that the facehugger put something in him, and the Covenant crew acknowledges that, and they, you know, it's not like, oh, where's Lope? Oh, he just died. And there's something.
It's very strange because then it's that scene which they kept, even though it doesn't really seem to relate to it, but in the script it says that Daniels suddenly realizes that Lope is impregnated when Tennessee is cooking the eggs.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and it just clicks for her, which I think is effective, but then since they removed that, why did they keep the scene?
Maybe they thought they needed those two characters to be closer for the third act. They made do with keeping a scene that didn't quite make sense.
Yeah. I guess so. Like, they're friends, and, you know, they share a hug, and it's and sad.
The script is, you're supposed to feel like, oh, that sucks, everyone died. But, the beginning of the script even says, like, they describe Tennessee as, like, a great friend to Daniels or whatever. And it's like, it's there in the movie, in the dialogue sometimes, but then that scene just kind of, it's like, here you go, here's something for you. It's interesting.
Yeah, I kind of find it interesting as well that just in Covenant in general, Daniels and Tennessee being survivors and Walter/David, it's interesting because that's the sort of dynamic that was left at the end of Aliens. We had Hicks, we had Ripley, and we had Bishop, and of course we've got Newt, but we've got, like, no children except for all of the colonists.
And the embryos, maybe, tuck in the children type thing, you know? A little more twisted, but I like that.
Aliens was the only one to have survivors, or more than one survivor before. And now we've got Alien Covenant, which is like, I guess a lot of people have drawn parallels between Aliens and Alien Covenant because of the dropship sequence and having the security detail. So it makes sense that in the ending we'd have Tennessee and Daniels as a friendship and survival as well, like Ripley and Hicks.
Yeah, and it seems... I was kind of surprised that Ridley Scott paid heed to Aliens as much as he has. Like, I know the Wayland Industries website with the timeline and everything mentioned, like, something of a pulse rifle type development.
Yeah.
Or especially the power loader and the atmospheric processor and stuff.
Yeah.
Or with Alien Covenant, he has all these homages to Aliens, and even Advent, you know, he mentions a queen, and I was just shocked that he was even going to mention anything about Aliens.
Well, he can't really completely ignore canon, even though... Yeah. And I think with Aliens, I think that's the only other Alien film he's watched. He refuses to watch 3 or Resurrection. Yeah, he may have read the script. I know he was on the set of Alien 3 at one point, but that was it. But, you know, like, maybe the writers have taken a lot of notice of these sorts of things, and they're the ones who have to study film canon, so it's not really Ridley Scott that's directing that sort of thing anyway.
That's what I think, because Dane Hallett, I talked to him on Facebook one time, and he was saying that it was kind of left up to him and Matt to create the mythology around, like, what David is writing about and all these things. So I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah, it's the fans who work on the film that kind of ensure that all of those sorts of things continue going to a degree. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, I had one more point I think I wanted to bring up, and it was a line that David says that I really enjoyed. He said, "The future isn't biological, it's not synthetic, but it's biomechanical."
Yeah, I really liked that too. I'm so sad that it got left out.
I know. It's like now, kind of how Prometheus suffered from being a little too vague. The Alien Covenant, it seems like, got the same treatment this time.
That line would have worked so well.
Oh god, it's like a culmination of everything, and it's just so Geiger-esque and creepy to say to someone, and it's excellent.
And what's really amazing about that particular line is that's kind of the future for the human race as well. I've read a lot of things about transhumanism and approaching the singularity and what sort of things that we're going to have, like a technological reckoning. And the only way the human race is going to survive is by integrating all of this technology into us. Otherwise, we're going to get snuffed out just as easily. So it's very interesting too. It's playing into that sort of fear of losing our humanity as well. So
yeah. more Blade Runner parallels, of course, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Things that I've noticed in the script is Daniels is Griffin.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, I don't know whether that was supposed to mean something.
I have written down, I looked up Daniels, and of course the male equivalent is Daniel, which means in Hebrew, God is my judge. And the book of Daniel is about Daniel, and he's taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and he serves faithfully until the Persians conquer Babylon. And but the whole time he believes in God still. He hasn't relinquished his faith.
Another thing I noticed is this force field around the planet. That's what actually stops David from leaving, instead of the Juggernauts being disabled by the pathogen.
That's right, yeah, and it stops. It gives Tennessee and Rix and Upworth a little more to deal with and to do.
Yeah, which is a pity that we don't get more of that. I do like Tennessee, Upworth, and Rix being on the ship and not really being able to do much, and the sort of trying to deal with Tennessee freaking out. I thought that was quite genuine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I enjoyed it, but this would have been really cool to try to triangulate and coordinate the ground crew with the Covenant crew to try to eliminate this force field.
Yeah, and I think any addition to the engineer culture or mythos that isn't too explicative in what things do is nice. I like keeping their culture vague. I think that would have been a good instance to do it.
Yeah, and I think even when we're watching The Crossing and the pathogen is hitting the city, it kind of seems like it's hitting a force field or a dome before it dissipates. So it's really interesting. I think that could have been part of before they got rid of the force field idea.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because it does kind of round out at the edge and... yeah, that's strange. I didn't even see that. That's fascinating.
Another thing I noticed is David doesn't end up stabbing Walter. He ends up grabbing him by the neck and then throwing him off a cliff, which it seems to me very much Blade Runner-ish in the sense that Roy Batty and Deckard have this fight on the roof, except in Blade Runner, obviously, it's different.
Right. One person doesn't die, or he doesn't fall off.
Exactly, and in Alien Covenant they're trying to put a twist on that, so I thought that was interesting, but I far prefer the stabbing in the neck.
Yes.
And they moved the kiss as well, because originally the kiss was a lot earlier on. I think it was when he was talking about Daniels, so that becomes a little bit more awkward and creepy.
Which is welcome.
Yeah, which is welcome, and then David is very awkward and creepy, but I think that really takes away from Walter reflecting on his feelings for Daniels, so I'm glad they moved it.
It's the contrast between David kissing Walter and then his immediate stabbing in the neck, that's gone too, and that really gets me in the movie every time, where I kind of forget how abrupt it is.
Yeah, exactly, that kiss of death, it seems... poignant there, yeah.
Absolutely.
More Blade Runner-ish, of course, with Roy Batty and Terrell, so...
Oh, that's right, yeah. Well, and I was thinking that, because you had mentioned it was very Blade Runner-esque, I was thinking what they could have done was have it so how somehow David is about to, help Walter up from a cliff, or, you think David's gonna just drop him, but then he saves him, but then he does end up dropping him, something along that.
Yeah, that would have been cool as well, if they did end up keeping it that way.
Yeah, it would have been interesting.
Another thing I noticed is that there's pretty much zero reference to Shaw in the entire thing, except for, just Shaw didn't die in the crash and blah, blah, blah. They talk about that, but there's absence of her presence in the artwork. The themes of creation comes from drawing and not the flute. So, yeah, that's another interesting way of doing it, because it's a lot less phallic, isn't it?
Very much so, and maybe that was... I like that somebody went in and was like, no, we need it to be phallic,
Yeah. And just in case people don't get it because it's being too subtle, will say, "You blow, I'll do the fingering."
Yeah, now memes everywhere now.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. You know, when I was in the theater, most everybody laughed at that scene, and me and my friend looked at each other and were like, well, that was a weird comment, but it fit really well. You know? But everybody was just cracking up at that, and it was funny, but it was like, it's such a good line, though.
Yeah, and I feel like in Alien Resurrection, they had a very similar line, which was, "Who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?" And then John chimes in, "I can get you off, but maybe not the boat," you know? So there's been cheesy lines in Alien films before, so yeah. Oh,
yeah, I think it fits perfectly. And when I was young and I saw Resurrection, I didn't understand that until much, much later. And now I think it's hilarious. It's great.
And I think this line is kind of similar in that sense. So if you're young and you're watching this movie, you won't quite get it until you're much older and you'll be like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I see. So yeah, that's really cool.
And it even works in a way of, like, you hear it and you laugh because it's, you know, sexual, it's funny, but then you think about it later, you're like, whoa, actually that really fits in with how Alien is and how it always has been.
Yeah, exactly. It's the sexual undertones of every single scene, and even the design of the xenomorph. It definitely...
Oh, it's great.
It's all over it. Yeah. Another thing I noticed, and this is something that Mr. H brought up with me in my podcast with him, he didn't like the fact that David said, "That's the spirit."
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at this script, page 91, for those following at home. David goes, "You've got spirit. I can see why Walter thought so much of you." So they obviously changed that to fit into the Blade Runner theme because they took a lot of Blade Runner themes out in other parts.
Yeah, well, and it's slipping my mind, but did Daniel stab him in the chin with the nail? That was missing as well, and then they just made this whole scene into an homage, you know?
Yeah, I think the stabbing part is gone.
And there we go. So she must not even take that nail out and put it around her neck or anything.
Yeah, I guess so.
Interesting. So that's funny that they kind of created that just for the hell of it.
Yeah, because originally it wasn't in there. So there you go, Mr. H. They didn't purposely put it in there. It's just that someone read the script and go, hey, wait a second, that sounds like that part in Blade Runner. Why don't we put that in? So...
Yeah, that's probably exactly what happened, too. Or Ridley Scott's like, oh, I made Blade Runner, let me put in a Blade Runner thing.
Yeah, exactly. I've analysed this movie to death, as you know. It's really interesting because a lot of things where I've drawn a lot of meaning to that aren't even in this script. So that means that they weren't purposely put in the first place. Just finding meaning in random shit.
Isn't that funny how that works? Isn't that like life, though? You just kind of find meaning in shit that doesn't have meaning?
Yeah, it's just like how they say in Dirk Gently, Holistic Detective Agency, everything is connected. And when I look at things, I can't help but see connections and stuff all the time, so...
It's a gift, definitely.
or a curse, who knows?
It could be both, yeah.
Yeah, it could be both at the same time.
Well, it's funny how the script has a lot of stuff that you can kind of see where either it got placed somewhere else or it just ended up not happening. But like on page 85 and 86, David mentions to Walter about building an empire and that every general needs an army, which is his xenomorphs, of course. And that empire building, that conquest is kind of put into Advent a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just the fact that he's talking about demons as well, it's really obvious to the Milton Paradise Lost parallels. So,
yes.
No ambiguity about that.
Yeah, that's something I'm glad that they changed. I'm glad it's more ambiguous and not as heavy-handed in terms of the Paradise Lost parallels.
And David also mentions Pandora's box, which Ridley Scott had mentioned Prometheus to be about the urns that they find of the engineers, the pathogen being like Pandora's box.
It makes sense to be and destroy. It can do good and it can do evil.
That's right.
That's cool.
I really like that they changed Griffin to Daniels.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe they thought that. They're just like, it didn't sound right. And they had to fix it.
Pity that they didn't keep the fact that David reverse engineered the xenomorphs.
I know, even here, right? He does the same thing he does in the book, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right. And I feel like the book is nearly based on this, so there must be another script that Alan Dean Foster had been handed, which was much closer to the movie, and that's the one that we're missing.
Yeah, where we have just one gap that needs to be filled now, I think.
That's it.
Overall, if I had to pick a version of Covenant that I would say is awesome and like a 9 out of 10, it would probably actually just be the book. I think if the book was made into the movie exactly as the book is, I would love this movie, like way more than I already do.
I agree with you, and I've said that before. You know, I've always thought that the book was superior to the movie, even though the movie is my favourite. And it's a combination of the symbolism and a combination of the practical effects in David's lab. Even the use of chiaroscuro, which is like the intenseness between the light and the dark in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
It really highlights things. It's just visually it's very pleasing. As a story, initially it did not satisfy me, and I think that part of that was just being misled, thinking that Shaw was going to be in the movie. So I can forgive it for that because it was an intentional misdirection.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think kind of going back to what we were talking about with finding meaning where there is none, I know I was doing that with Prometheus for a while, where it was a 10 out of 10. I loved it forever, no problems. And only recently have I kind of been just backtracking a bit and being like, well, okay, maybe this wasn't on purpose, maybe it's just not good, you know. Which I think there are posts about, like, are the characters in these movies, or especially Prometheus, actually stupid, or is there a reason to portray them as stupid? And I think that's partially true, and also partially us trying to make something of nothing.
Yeah, trying to excuse the writers.
Exactly, yeah.
Another thing is the Xenomorph fight and the Neomorph fight, which was
of course,
definitely in the novel and is obviously in this script. There's obviously more Neomorphs as well, instead of just being the 3 that we initially see and the 2 Xenomorphs. So, there's no cargo lift fight either.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of a big one.
And you could tell that a lot of that was kind of added in later.
Yes, it felt very jarring, I guess, would be the right word.
Yeah, it's very, very forced, and I can see why people thought that those particular scenes weren't very genuine.
Yeah, there's just a feeling, when I see that cargo ship scene, it doesn't hit the way it should. It's not as interesting as it could be, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I know there's plenty of people out there who really love that scene, and it really speaks to them, and they thought the action was great. And, you know, Catherine Watterson did a lot of the stunts for that. She didn't depend on a stunt double to use that axe and grab onto the lift. That's her being thrown around. So
that's badass. That's awesome.
That is. Good for her. But
yeah,
for me, that scene didn't really work. So I'm sorry, Catherine Watterson, if you're listening.
Yeah, we love you still. It's okay.
Yeah, her playing Daniel is very badass, and she's done a really great job, but I felt that scene was definitely out of place. I far prefer the final fight scene in the ship, even though it was changed a bit as well.
Yes, the shots of the alien inside of the terraforming vehicles, it's smashing its way through to get to Daniels, are some of my favorite shots of the alien in the movie, I think.
Yeah, and that was Ridley Scott's response to the Xenomorph being trapped behind glass in both Aliens and in Alien Resurrection.
Oh, yeah, okay.
No one tell him that it's plastic, apparently.
Yeah. God forbid he finds out.
That's just to show how strong the Xenomorph is, that it can't be contained, which is, I think, pretty cool.
Yeah. And to the Neomorph fight, I think it even fights 2 of them at the same time at one point. Completely eviscerate. And that just would have been so visually appealing and so cool. I'm so disappointed.
It's a real pity that Animal Logic, who did the special effects, I believe, for the Xenomorph, didn't have the opportunity to refine those scenes, because they've done amazing work on other movies. One of them, closer to home, Happy Feet.
Oh, what?
Yeah, they've done a lot of amazing stuff, and I think if they were given the right amount of time and not as rushed, we probably would have seen a better Xenomorph, and people probably would not have complained as much. As well as that, I think the screens in the Covenant was actually, the special effects was done by another group called Luma. So that's why there's a discrepancy between the Xenomorph that we see on the screen and the Xenomorph that we see in live action fighting against the Covenant crew.
Oh, I was wondering about that, yeah, because they definitely made a decision to change it. And again, another jarring change.
Yeah, exactly. The shower scene, which I noticed in the script, they don't mention any music.
Yeah, so it'd just be a silent horror fest, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it would have been better, actually. I've seen a fan edit version where they've taken that music out of that scene and it's just Rix and Upworth having that shower and it feels scarier.
Yeah.
The music kind of takes you out of it.
Yeah, because you're kind of like, oh boy, they're gonna die. I know already.
Exactly. That scene in the script, the way they've written it is kind of like when Ripley is putting on her spacesuit and she's getting ready to flush the alien out the airlock, so...
Oh, that's way better.
Yeah, they talk about them being naked and vulnerable, like Ripley was naked and vulnerable, so...
Oh, that's too bad. That's another thing. Maybe in the book, and a combination of the book and some of the stuff in the script would have really fleshed out a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pity it didn't go as well as I would like it to have gone, but at the same time, they even mention Shaw's cross, which was not gold. Prometheus has gold in this, so there's little things that bother me. And the waterlogged diary.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been nice to be able to read a couple of pages of that.
I know, if they could, maybe, because they gave Alan Dean Foster the Origins thing to work on, and they said you can't do the Shaw David thing. So maybe, oh man, this is heavy speculation, but I'd love for them to create, like, a replica of Shaw's journal or something. That would be really...
Oh, if they release that as a book, I'm so buying it, maybe twice.
yeah, I'll buy a copy for everyone I know. I mean, that's just fantastic.
Yeah, I noticed more from the David's drawings, as you know, from doing the transcriptions and stuff, we've noticed that the text is wildly different from the original text that the concept artists put in. And I don't know whether that was their intention to make it look more ambiguous or just trying to make David look like he was more consistent over his writing. But the silly thing is that they've actually kept the concept artists writing in some parts and not in others.
Yeah. It just looks sloppy.
There's like 2-3 sets of writing now instead of just one.
Yeah.
Whoever was in charge of that, you suck, you've done your job wrong, give it to us.
Yeah, give it to the people who make it their life goal to understand these movies. Seriously.
Exactly. People who are a bit more passionate about it.
Yeah. Like, Ridley Scott, as much as I love the guy, he just says some stuff sometimes that is like, we're not even thinking about the continuity or anything. It's like...
Yeah, I guess you got to kind of see it from a director's point of view, and this is what I've heard when Jamie from the Perfect Organism podcast was interviewing Charles de la Zarica. When Charles had watched Prometheus, he had watched a version. So when people talk about Prometheus and what you think about the movie, he's seen so many variations of the movie, it's really hard to think of what actually ended up being the movie in the end. So I think it's kind of the same for Ridley Scott. He gets to see these movies in a very different way to what every other person does. And he talks about things being canon that were only canon in the book. So obviously he's thinking about the original script or original concepts that he had when filming Alien 1979. So I really can't hold too much against him in the fact that he can't really remember what was there and what wasn't. Because I'm starting to get that way by watching all of these fan edits of the different Alien movies, because I can't remember what the originals were containing.
Oh man, I can't even, I haven't started going down that rabbit hole yet, but it seems like, that makes sense, where a director is seeing all these different versions, and, he's not like us where he's speculating and watching the movie every other night, to figure something out. He watches it and he's like, good, did a good job, what's next?
Yeah, exactly. And I was having a listen to his commentary for Alien 1979 the other day, and he was talking about saying the beast is cooked in reference to the chest burster coming out of Kane's chest, because at that point he had seen it over 22 times.
Oh my god.
He hasn't just seen it once, not like us when we watch the movie and it's one continuous thing. He's seen it with different takes from different angles, and then you go into the editing room and he's seen it from different angles there, and he's splicing it into the film, and then God knows how many times he's watched it after it's been edited, and then to do the director's cut he would have had to do it again. So I'm not surprised he's used that language saying the beast is cooked, it's done, no one wants to see that thing anymore, because he has seen it that many times, even his own work, not even the other variations of Alien. So yeah.
And even something I just did too is like, it's very easy to just say, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's dumb, he doesn't care about anything, he doesn't care about the alien like we do, blah blah blah. It's like you said, you put it into this perspective of what actual work they're doing and how much they're exposed to, for instance, the xenomorph. And it's like, I've seen it so many times, it's like not that scary anymore. I like that. That's a really good point. It's something I think all of us could benefit from.
Yeah, I think, some people, I don't mean to defend Ridley as much as I do, but I do. It just happens. Sure, he deserves a lot of critical thinking about his work, but I don't think he deserves as much hate as he gets.
I agree.
A little bit more empathetic as to what he's gone through as a director, even though I have no idea what that's like being a director, by the way. I've got no experience. I can't really say.
Same, yeah. We're here criticizing movies, it's all we got right now.
That's it. That's the extent of our professionalism. We are not in the industry or anything.
I'm the biggest fan, so I know what goes on,
So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We've covered everything that we wanted to say about the script, and we'll go deeper into it in our blog posts, but this is just the main points that we wanted to bring up.
Yep, yeah, we got the big stuff. I'm interested to see what other people will find too, and what kind of conversations come out of this script.
Yeah, it's I'll include a post by Gothic Fiction in Space, who has been kind enough to talk about the evolution of David and Walter throughout the scripts to what we finally got in Covenant. So I'll include that in the blog post so people can have a read. Thank you again, Gothic Fiction in Space, for being a contributor.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for contributing to our Patreon as well. We're now ad-free on Yutani again. Thank you very much. I don't know what else to say. Is there anything you want to say? This is your first podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on this, and I could talk about Alien all day to anybody, so I'm excited for future podcasts, and it's a pleasure to be among such like-minded and thoughtful people who see more than meets the eye.
So nice to hear your voice. I don't think I've ever heard your voice before.
Yeah, I think this is the first time, yeah. This is it's a new experience.
All right, so I guess this is Mother signing off, and Michael, what should we call you? Are you gonna...
Oh, boy.
Corny calls himself Android, so it's up to you.
Boy, put me on the spot here. God. We might have to save that for another one. I think Mike will do for now, and I will do better next time.
No problem. Okay, this is Mother and Mike signing off.
This is Colony Ship Covenant, reporting. All crew members apart from Daniels in Tennessee tragically perished in a solar flare incident. All colonists in hypersleep remain intact and undisturbed, on course for Orgai 6. Hopefully this transmission will reach the network and be relayed 6 years.
You can now support Yutani podcasts on Patreon and subscribe to yutani.blog to stay up to date.